Ouch! These are the kind of failures you hope you never see in a real tooth, but in this test, they happened a lot. Some files wore the stress on their flutes, unwinding and deforming under pressure. Others didn't follow the canal script at all. They ledged, they transported, they straightened the heck out of these canals, and a few didn't even survive the first block. I'm Dr. Jeffrey Clive, and welcome to EndoTested, where we push endodontic tools way past their brochure claims so you know exactly what to trust. 14 file systems, same blocks, same operators, only one earns the EndoTested crown. Let's go. Let's kick things off with our first contender, the ZenFlex CM. It comes with a fixed taper 04 or 06 with controlled memory metallurgy and has a triangular cross-section. The file took minimal force to bend and held the prebend at 45 degrees. This file was able to shape all 5 of the single curve blocks in 2.5 minutes. It was able to shape all 5 of the double blocks, but took a little bit longer to do so. It preserved the original curves well. It was able to complete only 2 of the nasty curve blocks before it started separating. It had 2 separations of the tip of the files. It was pretty slow to shape the nasty blocks. While the shapes the files created was decent, the unwinding of the files was very noticeable. You can see some major unwinding and some areas where the flutes reverse wound. You can also see where the tips broke, and there is some hyperwinding right near the fracture point. Testing the torque resistance, the ZenFlex CM gives up very early at only 0.4 ounce inches. To sum it up, the ZenFlex CM is super flexible, but it unwinds faster than a hygienist's schedule after a snow day. Also, it may be difficult to notice a file separation, since it's just the very tip that can separate instead of 2 to 3 millimeters like typical. If you ever can't get back to working length, that could be the reason why. Next, the SlimShaper Pro files. They have a triangular cross-section with a variable taper that averages 3%. The smallest file is gold with a silver tip, and the larger files are mostly blue with gold tips. The file held a bend better than average. It finished 4 of 5 single curve blocks in pretty short order. One of the blocks failed though due to a ledge. The files were able to shape all 5 blocks with a double curve in a little over 2 minutes. They were able to shape all 5 blocks in the nasty group in under 3 minutes. Very fast. The shape that the SlimShapers made was very good in the blocks. The downside was that the file unwound noticeably. You can see several areas that were affected after working in several blocks. The file had average torque resistance, breaking at 1.3 ounce inches. This file surprised me with how fast it cut and the nice shape it made, but I wish it didn't unwind as much as it did. The BlueShaper Pro has a 5% taper with a triangular cross-section. All the files were blue with 3mm gold tips. The file was able to hold a decent curve, but took more force than the previous files to bend. The BlueShaper Pro had some issues keeping with the canal anatomy, so it only produced 4 quality single curve blocks. One ledged, and with a few others, the file pulled me down and out of the canal, but those were acceptable. It was quick. It was able to shape all of the double curve blocks, but had really significant straightening. It didn't follow and reproduce the anatomy, but it was fast. The BlueShaper Pro struggled with the nasty blocks and was only able to complete 2 blocks in about 4 minutes average. There were 3 failures due to transportation. It is too good at cutting for its own good. The shape of the canals was poor due to straightening out of the canals and major transportations. The BlueShaper Pro files experienced some unwinding, but noticeably less than the first 2 groups. The files had a strong resistance to torque, breaking at 1.95. Very durable. So if you want a strong file to give you a white line to the end of the root, this will definitely get you there, but it may not be the same place as the natural canal. The fourth group was the Edge Utopia X7 files. The files have a firewire blaze heat treatment with a parabolic cross-section and a 1mm maximum flute diameter. They have only 14mm length of cutting flutes. They were able to hold a prebend very well. Unfortunately, the X7 files were only able to shape one block in the single curve group until a separation on the second block, where the file separated completely from the handle. The X7 files were able to complete all of the double curve blocks, but were kinda slow. The shape was conservative, but still led to mild straightening. They were able to complete only 2 of the nasty blocks before the purple file separated on the third block. They had an average time of just over 8 minutes, so pretty slow. It shaped relatively conservatively and produced better than average canal preparations, with just mild straightening. The file had some serious unwinding, however, with multiple major and minor unwound areas. It's just about as bad as the ZenFlex when it came to the unwinding. The files were able to resist up to 1.2 ounce-inches of torque before separating, which was about average. This file did well with pre-bending and was fairly conservative, but having a file literally come out of the handle was disconcerting. It was also pretty slow. The ProTaper Ultimate system utilizes files with distinct metallurgies. The slider is M-wire. Then the orifice opener, shaper, and finisher files are gold. They have auxiliary finishing files that are blue, but we didn't use those. The files have a rhomboid apical shape that transitions into parallelogram in the middle and coronal thirds. The slider was not able to hold a bend, whereas the finisher was able to hold a very subtle bend only. This was the worst pre-bending of any file system yet. The system was only able to shape 2 blocks in the single curve group because the slider separated on the third. It took just over 3 minutes to shape those. It was able to shape all 5 of the double curve blocks in an average time of 3¼ minutes. They were able to shape all 5 blocks in an average time of 3½ minutes, which was faster than average. After use, the unwinding was not readily noticeable, which is fantastic. The files resisted 1.2 ounce-inches of torque, which was about average. The ProTaper Ultimate was super good at not unwinding and stayed on track in the canal. I'd worry about slider separations in calcified canals though, because there may not be any visible sign of unwinding before it just up and fractures. EndoSequence Scout files look a lot like the Edge Utopia X7s. In fact, it was hard for me to distinguish any difference. They come in 04 and 06 tapers. They have a triangular parabolic cross-section. This file, like the X7s, had a great pre-bend. The Scout files had some trouble with a ledge and a perforation in the single block group. The time was a little slow to shape as well. They were able to shape 3 blocks with a double curve before a file separated, and they were pretty slow at doing that at 9½ minutes. The 17 files separated in the first block of the nasty group. The shape of the canals was about average. After use, there was significant unwinding, and this was about as severe as the ZenFlex and X7 files. The torque resistance was average, with a separation occurring at 1.1 ounce-inches. I don't see many redeeming qualities to the Scout file. They were pretty slow to shape, they had separations, and are more expensive than the roughly equivalent X7 files. Next up, the TruNatomy files are gold, heat-treated files with a slightly off-centered cross-section. The files have a regressive taper that shapes less coronally with a maximum flute diameter of just 0.8 millimeters. The files were able to hold a pre-bend better than average. The files were able to shape all 5 blocks with a single curve just over 3 minutes. Nice conservative shape. They shaped all double curve blocks in a similar time as the single curve group, but this group had a pattern of straightening. They shaped 3 blocks completely in the nasty group with an average time of 5 minutes. The glide path file separated on the 4th block of this group. The shape on the nasty group was a little better than the double curve blocks, with just subtle straightening. Looking at the files under the scope, There was a major unwinding area and several minor unwindings that I noted. The TruNatomy separated under 0.9 ounce-inches of torque, which was slightly below average. I kind of liked the TruNatomy files. They were pretty conservative and efficient, but they did have a little more unwinding than the ProTaper Ultimates. Alright, the HyFlex EDM, the OGSF set, which stands for Orifice Opener, Glider, Shaper, and Finisher. It's made from controlled memory blanks that have experienced electric discharge machining, which means that they're not ground or twisted into shape. This gives these files a distinctive matte and slightly gritty appearance. The files are quadratic apically, trapezoidal in the middle third, and triangular in the coronal third. The file was able to do the best yet at holding a prebend with very little force. The file was able to shape all 5 single curve blocks pretty quickly, just a minor apical ledge in one. It shaped all 5 of the double curve blocks in a slower but respectable time. Great shape on those, and it shaped 4 of the nasty blocks in about the same time as the double curve blocks. The finisher file suffered a separation on the 5th block. The shaping on these blocks was excellent. Looking at the files under the scope, these performed really well. There was minimal unwinding. It tolerated a max torque of 1.25. The HyFlex had good performance all around, no serious drawbacks, and the lack of unwinding was impressive. The 9th and final rotary group was the XP Shaper. This file is more expensive, but the idea is that you may be able to get away with using less files. These files have just an 0.1 taper and are said to adapt to the canal width. It's made of a max wire heat-treated niti with a coiled snake-like shape that has a triangular cross-section. It wasn't as easy to pre-bend with the irregular shape, but it did take almost no force to bend it. The XP Shaper was able to shape all of the single curve blocks in record time, just 1 minute and 27 seconds. Nice shapes too. Better yet, it shaped all of the double curve blocks in only 2 minutes and 12 seconds, which was way faster than the other groups. And it continued the trend with the nasty blocks, having a pace of 2 minutes and 21 seconds. However, on the 5th nasty block, the glide file separated. But that's because yours truly mistakenly used the same glide file that was used in the single curve blocks for the nasty blocks. And if I had used a new file for those, it may not have separated. Look at the 4th block on this nasty group. I can't believe it maintained such a significant curve after shaping. This definitely has the best shaping yet. When it came to unwinding, the glide path file in XP Shaper unwound a little more than average, but it does rotate at 900 RPM, which is faster than all the other groups. It had pretty low torque resistance and gave out at only 0.6 ounce-inches. This file blew me away with how quickly it shaped and how good the anatomy looked. I just wish it was a little more resilient and less costly. And that rounds it out for the rotary files. Moving on to reciprocating files. The first file in this category was from an online Chinese retailer called Azdent. This file was by far the least expensive, less than $3 per file. The file is blue heat-treated with an S-shaped cross-section. The file performed the best on the pre-bend test and held the bend at 90 degrees with only 84 grams of force. Best yet. The file did not come with a glide path file, so I used a reciprocating glide path file from Dentsply called the R-Pilot. Big mistake, turns out. The R-Pilot glide path file separated on the first block. I used a different rotary glide path file before using the Azdent on the second block, and it took me 6 minutes to shape that one block. For the next block, I used that same glide path file, and then the Azdent itself separated. Pretty disappointing. The Azdent was able to shape 4 of the double curve blocks before separating on the last one. It didn't set any land speed records. When it came to the nasty blocks, I tried the R-Pilot again and had to alternate using the R-Pilot and the Azdent to get to length, and eventually the R-Pilot separated and the Azdent was severely unwound. I took mercy on the Azdent and didn't use it on the second nasty block. The shaping was just okay. When it came to reviewing the files after use, there were a few broken R pilots, a broken Azdent, and the severely unwound one. I didn't torque test it since it was so deformed. Obviously, you get what you pay for with this file. It looks like a file, but who knows what it's actually made out of. The second reciprocating group was the Excalibur file. The Excalibur file has a 5% taper and is made of gold alloy niti. It has an S-shaped cross section as well, similar to the Azdent. The glide path file from this brand couldn't hold much of a prebend, but the Excalibur file could hold a modest prebend. These files were able to shape all of the single curve blocks pretty quickly, and the shape looked good. They were able to shape 3 of the double curve blocks. They were fairly straightened, and the Excalibur primary separated on the 4th block. The Excalibur system was able to complete only one of the nasty blocks. It ledged on the 2nd block, and then this small separated on the 3rd block. Just for fun, I wanted to see if I could shape a nasty block with just the glider path and the primary file. Interestingly, the glide file came unglued from the handle and was stuck in the block, just like the X7. It was pretty average when it came to the speed of shaping and the final shape it produced. Under the scope, there was some moderate unwinding noted. It held up well with torque load, however, and separated when experiencing 1.7 ounce inches, which is impressive. This file marked a significant step up in quality from the Azdent, but I still wouldn't rate it as high as most of the rotary files. The third reciprocating file system tested was one Reci from MicroMega. It uses a C-wire heat treatment and has an asymmetric cross-section. The file didn't hold a bend all that well. It had a very low torque setting and struggled to make it through the blocks because it would hit the torque limit almost immediately. The one Reci system had a file break on the first single curve block. Pretty embarrassing given the low torque setting. It was able to shape 2 blocks of the double curve before suffering a breakage, but it was painfully slow. I was not able to complete any of the nasty blocks due to a separation on block 1. Not only was it having a hard time finishing any blocks, but the blocks that were done didn't look anything special. The unwinding was noticeable after use, even though there was not much use since it never even got to the 5th block. The torque resistance was low, with a separation occurring at only 0.9 ounce inches. Just avoid this one, it's separation city. The penultimate group of the reciprocating type was the WaveOne Gold. This file is very popular. This file has a gold alloy with a parallelogram cross-section with variable taper, about 0.7 at the tip. It was pretty tough to bend the file, but it held a pre-bend at a decent angle. The file was able to complete 4 single curve blocks. One block got blocked out and was not able to shape the final millimeter. It seemed to jam debris apical to the tip of the file, and then it struggled to get back down to length. That happened on 3 blocks, but only one was bad enough that I felt shaping was compromised. The WaveOne Gold was able to complete 4 of the double curve blocks, but the files were pretty slow to do that. The Gold glider separated on the 5th block. The WaveOne Gold Small separated on the 2nd block of the nasty group, so the WaveOne Gold only completed 1 block out of that group. The shaping score was about average due to some straightening and the blocking out of those single curve blocks. When we look at the files after use, these experienced some unwinding to a pretty average extent. The most impressive aspect of the file was the torque resistance. It took a whole 2.5 ounce inches to cause separation of this file. Very impressive. This is indeed a tough file, but it still had a few separations when being used in those blocks. I might hold back on recommending this file due to the blocking that happened in the single curve blocks. Kind of worrying that that could happen in a real clinical scenario. The last group was the Reciproc Blue. It is made of blue heat-treated niti and has an S-shaped cross-section. It has a variable taper with more taper at the tip. It had very poor pre-bending performance and took a lot of force to bend. We had a lot of issues in general with the R pilot. It's not technically a Reciproc Blue file, but it is a reciprocating glide path file from Dentsply. It separated when we used it with the Azdent file, and it separated a lot as we were using it with this group as well. So with the single curve group, it's separated on the first block. So we used our gold glider instead to create the glide path on the remaining blocks for the Reciproc Blue. The Reciproc Blue was able to shape the remaining single curve blocks. It was only able to shape one of the double curve blocks before the Reciproc Blue itself separated on the second block. We had trouble with the nasty blocks as the gold glider separated on the first block. We used a rotary glide path for the following block, but the Reciproc transported badly and did not complete it. Then the Reciproc Blue file itself separated on the next block, so it completed none of the nasty blocks. With the blocks that it did complete, the canals were pretty badly straightened. After use, there was only one intact Reciproc Blue file, but it had unwound significantly. I don't see much use to buy this file, as it was the most expensive reciprocating file, and it performed pretty poorly on all the tests. So what did we learn from all this? Well, first of all, it's important to note that these are all tests on plastic blocks that don't perfectly replicate how these files might behave inside of real teeth with dentin and natural anatomies. But the blocks do a good job of sorting out which files hold up to some extreme pressure and which ones just don't. So as we go through the results, we're going to start with the lowest performers and work our way up to which file claimed the crown today. Starting from the bottom, files I would not use. The One Reci system and the R-Pilot glide path file. Both of those files were disasters for separations. You just cannot trust those files. The Azdent file, it's Chinese. I'm not sure if it's really made of nitide. It doesn't have FDA approval for use in the US, so I'd stay away from that one. The BlueShaper profile looked nice, but I wasn't really happy with the way that it caused ledges and transportation so easily. It's just too aggressive for me. In the use with caution category goes the ZenFlex CM file, which had some issues with tip separations. Also in this category goes the X7 Utopia and the EndoSequence Scout files. These files were pretty good at making a conservative shape, but I wasn't happy with how much unwinding resulted from their use and with the slowness of shaping those canals. It just took forever. And overall, the reciprocating systems had a tendency to try to cut too much at once and would torque out or separate. None of them was able to complete more than 10 of the 15 blocks. Moving into the good range, the ProTaper Ultimate did pretty well at shaping the canals and not unwinding. It's just that the prebendability wasn't there. The TruNatomy had a better prebend, but you gave up some unwinding performance in order to get that. But the shape turned out pretty nicely because it's fairly conservative in its taper. Well, the bronze award goes to the XP EndoShaper. This file was able to shape the fastest, and the canal shapes that it made were the best. Very conservative, minimal transportation or ledging. It did really well. It just had some issues with the prebend, which could make it difficult to use on second molars where space comes at a premium. In practice, I found it has kind of poor buckling performance, which means it has trouble progressing when a canal is really calcified. Now, it does do an excellent job of removing bulk canal tissue and retreatment, gutta percha. I definitely started to use it more after this study, seeing how well it performed. The silver award goes to the SlimShaper Pro. It did really well, it was quite fast, and it did leave pretty good shapes behind after it was done. The only note that I had of it was that the Z1, which is the first file in the sequence, it tended to unwind. In practice, I found it's best to use light pressure with this file and do a lot of rinsing and maybe recapitulating as you're using it, and it'll do just fine. It's also a great value. Compared to the XP Shaper, it was far less expensive, which can be nice if you're budget conscious. The HyFlex EDM claimed EndoTested crown for Best Endodontic File. It performed great across every category, especially in unwinding resistance and anatomic shaping. It performed well in practice, just like you would expect. My only small knock is that the glide path file doesn't have quite the same amount of prebendability as the other files in the series do. So that's it. We've looked at the files from worst to best, and if you'd like to have more videos that are data-driven such as this about endodontic products, Please palpate that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments below if there's other file systems you'd like me to test or any other type of review you'd like to see. And I hope that this video helps you to continue to deliver quality care to your patients, because here at EndoTested, everyone deserves a root canal done right.